So, hey there, this is Ray Villalobos, and welcome to Authored Content, the podcast where we talk about all things web design, web development, and Minecraft. I think I'm probably the only one that does that, but we honestly just talk about anything that comes into our minds. And today I am your special host, and we have here our co-host and master of CSS and web design.
What makes you special, Ray?
I am special because the other guy's not here.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, one of the things that make you special.
Yes, it's pretty much because I don't know what I'm doing with this Google Hangouts thing, so I'm going to stumble through the best that I can. So we have James Williamson, who's here from whichever one is the absolute best, Carolina.
Hi, everybody. That's right.
I don't know which one it is because I always forget.
I live in South Carolina. I don't live in that communist republic in North Carolina. It's ruled by a crazy dictator. That place is crazy land. No, I'm in South Carolina.
You know, and I should know that because I know that you're always talking about how you're from the South.
Yeah, so, yeah. That's all right.
For some reason, I always want to say North.
But you know, North Carolina is considered part of the South, so
that's true.
Yeah, it's a blanket term for a region.
So as you can probably tell, our normal co-host or host is not here. He's in Romania, where I think he is. Yes, I think he's visiting his brother or going to some sort of vampire convention.
Oh, good for him.
Which I think is pretty much the big tourism thing in Romania. It must be have to do with vampires.
That's
right. I bet they hate Twilight. I bet they really, really hate Twilight in Romania because it took this badass character that they had worked centuries to cultivate and turned it into this twinkly stardust kid, and they must hate that. They gotta hate that.
Right on. So today we have our special, awesome guest and the most friendly Brit that I know, senior staff author Simon Allardice. So I wish we had a little sound. Yay.
All Brits are friendly, of course. It's just it's the pompousness that you just can't stand.
Yeah. Well, Simon, it's excellent to have you back. It's always a treat to have you on the show, mainly because it gives me a chance to talk to you, which I don't get a chance to do that often. And so today, folks, we're going to be talking about WWDC, which is apparently something that Apple does every now and then, and that's probably going to dominate most of the conversation today, I would imagine, especially having Simon and Ray, two unabashedly Apple fanboys, on the show as well. So, Simon, what's been going on with you lately? Anything new that you care to talk about?
Yeah, well, that's the thing is my entire work life changed at about 10:30 on Monday morning.
And it got swift, didn't it?
Absolutely.
It got very swiftly. Yeah. You got swift.
That was the thing. I think nobody was expecting this. People were expecting new versions of iOS, big surprise. New versions of OS 10, no problem. They were even expecting new iPads, new iPhones, but I don't think anyone was seriously expecting a new programming language, and that came out of left field. And I think a lot of people are hugely enthusiastic about it because most people would say that Objective-C is the hurdle that you had to climb to get over to start working with iOS, and it wasn't. Well, I guess some people hated the language, but I don't recall ever meeting anyone that said, "Oh, Objective-C, that's the best thing ever." It was always a bit of a stumbling block, and I would never pretend that. The way I used to describe it to people is Objective-C is a language that is going to make you, in the first month of learning it, say, "Wait, what?" a dozen times. I'm supposed to do what now? And with Swift, we've got this great, very clean, really nice language, kind of a little bit Python-esque in the way that it looks. We don't have to have semicolons. But it's obviously an Apple language. If you've been working in the Apple world, it feels very Apple-ish, the things that you have to do. I think it's a great language. So yeah,
well, for those that may not understand or be aware of what Swift is, why don't you give them the brief, say, 30,000-foot intro into what Swift is going to do for folks and what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've in the Apple world, we have been living with decisions that were made back in the late 80s, early 90s, from when Steve Jobs had the next step or next computing. They used this language called Objective-C, which is basically the C language with a bunch of cruft added to it to make it object-oriented. That's what people wanted to do. And that kind of the problem, that term cruft, is things have been added to this. It has been like kind of a buckaroo of a programming language that as it's gone through the years, more things were kind of clipped on top to it, that it became a bit of a pain to learn. It was never the most pleasant thing to do. So this is a new language that's been worked on in secret for about the past 4 years, judging from some of the things that I've heard and read about it, and is invented from the ground up for Apple development, for working on iOS, for working on desktop development. It's a lot more succinct. It's a lot cleaner. You can get the same things done with less, not necessarily less code, but certainly less characters, and it's more readable. One of the I think justifiable criticisms of Objective-C is that as a developer, if you weren't very familiar with it, you could look at a page of Objective-C and say, I have no idea what this is doing. Whereas you can, typically people, if you've used C#, you can look at Java, and even if you don't really know Java, you can read it and understand what that's happening. Swift is a very readable language, and I think that's one of the benefits, because more readable code is safer code. It's better to do. Now, there's a few misconceptions. A few people have looked at Swift and they've seen a few things like keywords like var and said, oh, it's like JavaScript. Well, it's nothing like JavaScript. It really isn't. And if you approach Swift like it's JavaScript, you're going to have a bad time. It is more complicated than that. This is not some simple scripting language. This is a very high-powered, well-thought-out, object-oriented language. The criticism I think some people have.
So it's not ActionScript then.
It is not ActionScript. This is a this is a language, and I think that they look.
Because I'll be honest with you, I was kind of hoping it would be. I know ActionScript.
No, you've got very powerful features. You've got things like generics and closures and tuples, and there's all this stuff that is nothing that you would get that kind of level of substance out of a JavaScript or ActionScript. It is more complicated than that because it kind of needs to be. It needs to support a lot of these modern features. It's got things taken from functional programming like map and filter, which is ways of writing, one line of code that you might have to do 20 lines if you were working in a more procedural or straightforward programming language. And of course, one of the issues right now is everybody's still just figuring this out. Everybody's jumping into the documentation that Apple released and going, okay, what does this do? How is it different from Objective-C? What don't I have to do anymore? What are the new things I have to do? What are the new features that I get? And there's a lot of all of this.
Yeah, so the nice thing is that you have definitely been somebody who has been using Objective-C for a long time, and now you're getting a lot of experience with this language. I mean, what is it going to do to an existing developer to make this? Do you feel like they need to make the switch? Everybody needs to? Or I know that there's still some hooks to Xcode in the new language. How is that workflow going to be affected?
Sure, and the thing is, so Apple have not exactly gone on record and said, hey, we're going to Swift, and you're going to have to dump Objective-C. Having said that, Apple do not have a great, typically speaking, Apple have a very controlled developer world. There are specific ways to do things. So unlike, say, working in the .NET world, where there's, hey, here's your choice of language, here's your choice of design pattern, you can do all of this, whatever you want to do. Apple don't tend to work that way, so it would not surprise me if over the next year or two, Objective-C is first kind of de-emphasized and then discouraged and then deprecated and then disallowed. I don't know that's going to happen, and if it does, it'll be a few years for this to roll ahead.
I'd be surprised if it doesn't happen, to be honest.
I'd be surprised if it doesn't happen, absolutely. When you read, and it's very interesting, there's a few things in the available documentation that I find that make me stroke my beard and go, in that they've said, Apple say in the introduction in their document, this is a language that was designed to scale from hello world to entire operating systems. I mean, they have put a big bet on this. So, it's like, okay, so when's, OS 11, what's that going to be? Is that going to be a Swift-based operating system the way that OS 10 really is? There's a lot of Objective-C baked into it under the hood. So, yeah, I think, now, here's the thing, though.
You're saying we might be seeing a singular language across all of Apple's platforms eventually.
It would not. I mean, that's the thing. Have they said anything like that? No. But is that something that would jibe with the way that Apple works? yeah, this is the way. This is the way that you code. This is the way that you program for Apple hardware. And yeah, that I don't think would be a bad thing.
Well,
I think go ahead.
I was going to say it's really interesting when you compare that to Microsoft's strategy, and when when they fuddled around a little bit with .NET and a separate mobile platform and didn't really understand how to do that, and then they decided, well, we're just going to do HTML and JavaScript for everything. Right. So Apple obviously had the exact same conversation internally with themselves about what they were going to do 4 or 5 years ago, and we're starting to see the fruits of that, I suppose.
Yep, it definitely feels that way. There's definitely a lot of work right now. I mean, Objective-C is not going to suddenly disappear. There's so much out there over the last years and years and years of everything from Stack Overflow answers to sample code to all that kind of stuff. So if you're someone who was learning Objective-C for the last 3 or 6 months and you think, oh, why did I bother? Well, there's a lot of good reasons why you would do. And if you have been learning Objective-C, whatever you've done in that, it's not just about the language. You've become familiar with Xcode. You've worked with concepts like actions and outlets and advanced automatic reference counting. None of that goes away. That's all still there. It's not like anything you learned about Objective-C was useless. It's just, yeah, the shift has been to the same ideas, but described in a cleaner and simpler and, I find, far friendlier language. I mean, that's the thing. I've spent part of most every day in some kind of Objective-C, for the last 5 or 6 years. And I would quite happily drop it like a hot potato and never write another line of it again. It's not going to happen. I'm still I've got things to maintain. I've got code bases that have to be worked on. But yeah, I'm loving Swift. I think it's great.
To your point earlier, I will say, obviously I go to great pains sometimes to identify myself not as a developer. But looking through, hello. But I was going to say, just looking through some of the code examples, I could read it and knew exactly what was going on. So to your point, I agree with you. It is a language that appears on the surface to me to be pretty easy to understand and learn.
Right.
And what about this idea of an interactive sort of coding tool that lets you see everything while you're doing it? Is that really effective? You're playing around with it for just a few days. What kind of impression can you give us of that part of it?
So yeah, the feature that you're talking about is the Xcode Playgrounds idea. So one of the challenges, but another little speed bump that you had to do as an Objective-C developer, if you just wanted to write a little bit of code, you needed to create an entire project around this. You created a full project with a full build system, and you had to have these methods, the main method, and import all your header files, and just get a lot of stuff done just to write a line. So there's this new feature called Playgrounds in Xcode, which is a very instant ability to write a line of code, and you don't then run it. It just is run automatically by you writing it. It's visible. The results of your code are automatically visible. You've got both kind of a debugger area and a visual area. You want to do a loop that goes around a variable 1,000 times and adds 5 to it every time. You can see a visual representation of your value going up immediately just by clicking in that. And I think it's both a really good thing for developers to go, I've got this idea that I want to do, this what's often referred to as a spike. You've got this single code you want to try, and you don't want to drop it in your existing project yet, so you just want to write a few lines. You can go do it in Playground. As well as, I think this is going to be a fantastic way for teaching people how to do code, that you're not intimidating them by them. Hey, I want to show you how to do Hello World in Objective-C. Well, first I'm going to have about 10 lines of stuff that you're going to see and go, I have no idea what this is doing. In a Playground in Swift, you just write print line, Hello World. And it works, and it outputs that. You don't have to run it. You don't have to worry about debuggers. It just works. It's just supremely obvious about what's happening. You can look at the visual values of your variables as they grow and change. You can see all this going on. So it's both the coding environment and what's happening under the hood. I think, yeah, they're great. So I think Playgrounds have a big part of this new world.
So this was obviously a developer conference. I mean, there's no new hardware announcements, right. And there was a lot of stuff that I think was going to be pretty interesting to developers. Like, what are some of the changes that you saw that Apple brought out in addition to Swift that you think are going to make like a super awesome impact to somebody who's a developer?
So there's, every year, with every release of iOS, the developers get new APIs, new code written by Apple that we can use without having to write it ourselves. Now, they sometimes kick around the numbers. I mean, they said there's 4,000 new ones in this version of iOS. Now, that doesn't mean it's got to go and learn 4,000 things, because they're grouped into areas. And particularly, there's the new health application, which itself has a whole API behind it called HealthKit. And that, you can tell, is really targeted to people doing anything with wearable devices. And it's not just going to be limited to Apple stuff. It could interface with your Fitbits and your Nike watches and all that kind of stuff. And for those of us who are interested in wearables, there's some, you can look at that health app on iOS 8 and go, again, I wonder what this is going to bring in the future, because there's a lot of data there. So that's one of them, but that's a fun but probably limited. I don't think 9 out of 10 developers are not writing wearable device stuff, so they may look at it and then go, okay, what else? You've got HomeKit for home automation, which I think falls into the same idea. So, obviously the last couple of years there's been things like Nest and all this, and Bluetooth-driven locks and all that. Same kind of thing, a way of having your iPhone instantly talk to your sound system, your thermometer, your thermostat, your locks, all this kind of stuff. It's the way the world is going. There's also another big push on the iCloud, being able to use that as kind of storing all the assets for your applications. So there's a lot of different areas. Now, I think it's true this time around that any one developer might be interested in one part of this. They might be interested in HealthKit or HomeKit or the CloudKit or some other little piece. The ability, for example, that we can now, as an app developer, I could use the little Touch ID sensor on the device. You couldn't do that before. So there's a lot of these little features. I don't think all developers are interested in all of them, but there's some good stuff there that we've been looking for.
I think I was really interested in the fact that that for the first time it seems like Apple is really open to reaching out and integrating with other products outside of their own ecosystems, and I found that part really, really interesting, because it seems to be a little subtle shift in the way that they typically operate.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was nice to see, particularly with that, that health application was not released and then followed with, and you have to use our iWatch with it. It's okay. This is open. Whatever you have, whatever you want to tie in, whether that's a wearable device or a website, or you're creating a medical website that needs to be able to spit some data into that. It's all open and it's all accessible, which I think is great.
Yeah,
which, by the way, where is that damn watch?
Yeah,
it's good. We're all going to buy it, right?
We've been talking about it for 5 years now. Where is the damn thing?
Well, absolutely. I had this thing a couple of weeks ago. I think I tweeted something, which is that I need a name for the idea of I'm holding off on buying a whole bunch of things because of this. I'm not even aware of if it is a possibly non-existent device.
I have the term for you. Do you want it?
Well, Morty gave me a good one too. So what's yours?
Well, mine would be iAnticipation.
Okay, his was to Wapel. We're Wapling on this. Mine was Delapel, I think, was another one. I'm Delapling on a television. I'm Delapling on Delapling on a monitor, because I want. Where's my Retina matte finish 27-inch monitor? Where's my watch? So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what do you think this does to the competition? I mean, it seems like they went through and last WWDC, they kind of held off because they had to redesign, re-engineer the operating system for the iOS devices. This time it looks like they were holding on to all those like FAQs, complaints, checklists of what people wanted with their phones and devices. What does this do to Android? And I'm not a Android developer, but I remember installing the SDK, the software development kit for Android, and remember, oh my gosh, this is a real pain, and it's very slow. Yeah. So what do you think competitively it does to Android?
I think it is, and again, take my opinions with a pinch of salt, because I'm not an Android developer. But I think part of this does really answer some of the pain points for a lot of people getting into iOS development. The language is kind of cruddy, and there's that's one of the big things. Whereas a lot of people really did like Java. If you were Java, you'd find it much easier to go and do Android stuff than you would do iOS. I think this closes that gap a bit more. I think in particular areas where they're releasing stuff that for developer focused that really kind of kicks Android is things like Metal. I don't know if you saw that. Metal is their kind of under the hood SDK for
I saw that.
Really interesting graphics. And this is a thing that Android, they just can't do that because they just don't have that that clarity on hardware in the way that Apple do. So I think that's them doubling down on, because we have such a controlled ecosystem, we can create these fantastic libraries that are going to work in a way that with Android, yeah, forget it. Maybe some of them will, but some of them won't. You also see the great ability that Apple have of when they release this new OS, how quickly that is going to have its impact on the existing user base in a way that Android developers must wish that happened. That within a month, it's 70-80% of people are on the new OS, and within 6 months.
I will say this, however, today, and just today, I finally updated to iOS 7. I had not updated until
you were one of the 10% or whatever. Yeah. They showed a little graph.
I am. I am the 10%. Yeah. I'll tell you who I think who really must have watched this and went, oh, geez, or Box and Dropbox. They must have been like, oh, fantastic. Because they're really increasing iCloud and integrating it into just about darn near anything, and they're basically slashing prices down to the point to where I'm not sure those guys are going to be able to compete with it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally agree. And I saw a bunch of tweets. Oh, they're trying to kill Dropbox or whatever. But in their defense, it's kind of, well, from the way iCloud started a few years ago, it was obvious that this is going to happen. If anyone was thinking that they were going to just kind of go, oh yeah, we're not really going to do much with iCloud anymore, it's like, no, it's obvious they are trying to bake this in and make this a huge part of it. The way that they've worked with iTunes, the way that they've worked with iBooks, that whole area, it's been supremely obvious. So if that surprised anyone that it was another step down that path, right. It's not really quite fair. I mean, it was going there. But yes, I mean, I'm kind of the same, which is, I'm a Dropbox user. I'm fairly invested in that. But could I believe at some point that it becomes a bit of a...
Hello?
Uh-oh. His audio dropped off.
He was talking too fast for the NSA to keep track of him. So
I know. Come back to us, Simon. That was really interesting.
I don't know what just happened there.
Oh, there you go. Hey, he's back.
So yeah,
you must have said something to trip the sensors.
I know, exactly. One of the things that I was really interested in, and I think what Apple always does best, is be able to merge all their devices together and give people an experience that perhaps other devices can't do. So they did add a lot to that. They added that feature where you could pick up a conversation from your phone on your Mac, and then on your iPad. A lot of that integration that I think other people are going to have a harder time doing, because they're on different devices. Like Microsoft doesn't necessarily make the phones and the OS, although they do, but they have their own version of it. Android doesn't really make an OS. So, I mean, that I saw as a huge advantage for Apple people. So what was your take from a I know that I'm a fanboy, like you say. I admit it. But, James, what was your take on some of the announcements that sounded cool to somebody who's maybe not 100% branded?
Right, yeah, and my problem with Apple has always been this sort of you buy into my ecosystem and you stay within this walled garden, and yes, they craft great user experiences most of the time, but when they don't, it's really frustrating. And I hold up iTunes as probably the main example of that. But a couple of the things that I thought were really great is I have an Apple TV and I use it a good bit, and of course, it's reliant on my Wi-Fi network. Well, from what I understand, AirPlay is now enabling local connections between AirPlay-enabled devices, and that's going to be huge because that means that I can start traveling with these devices. I could take my Apple TV with me if I go on a road trip, and it's going to work with my phone, and I'll be able to stream content. Hopefully, it'll improve the streaming abilities because right now they're pretty bad. But that was exciting. I was excited. There was a really small thing that I think went unnoticed by most people, and that is that they're no longer going to throttle JavaScript engine, the JavaScript engine in non-Safari web views, which is really exciting because prior to this, earlier versions of iOS, Safari has had a pretty nice JavaScript rendering engine, but the web views that you can use that are baked into the WebKit web views don't. So a lot of apps that are using sort of that web view feel sluggish because of that. But now that's gonna go away, and it's gonna allow a greater experience for people that are creating applications that are web-based applications that are not necessarily tied to iOS. So I think that's actually a really big thing that nobody's really talking about that much. So those are two things that I'm pretty stoked about.
Yeah, so Safari itself got a lot better. There's some significant upgrades. You know, some of the graphic engine got a lot faster. Just about everything seems like got a little bit of an upgrade. So that's pretty amazing. I wonder what they're going to do on the next WWDC.
Maybe we'll finally get our lot.
Yeah, maybe so. Like, Simon, what do you think from a maybe non-developer, just as a user? Like, what were some of your good features, just as somebody who uses Apple devices all the time? What did you like that wasn't necessarily a developer thing, but something that you thought, man, that I really need that right now?
Yeah, and I'd agree that this whole continuity world that they are kind of doubling down on is really the big thing, the most noticeable thing. If you are an iOS 7 user, you're not going to see anything substantially visible on the change to iOS 8. I imagine there's be a lot of people that they might upgrade and then they're looking at Notification Center, and it is different, but they're like, I don't remember whether it actually did this before. It's just a little smoother. I think it's been a little bit more controlled. But yeah, this whole continuity idea, the handoff idea that you might be, trying to answer an email as you're walking into the office and then just sitting down and go, oh, let me finish it at a real keyboard. And that just working and being very smooth, sounds like something that, who's really going to care? But I think people do. I mean, they already kind of made that work with iMessages. And that was to the point where I've done that, a dozen times where, I'm walking into the office in the morning going, oh, hang on, let me just finish that conversation over here. And I think that's great. And it's become the very obvious way of, well, why doesn't everything work this way? It's just going to be part of the landscape. So yeah, I think from a user perspective, continuity is the big deal about iOS 8.
Yeah, very much so. So yeah, so much stuff that you can't possibly fit it all in one single podcast. So, but that's actually our time. That's all we have.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, that was 29 minutes, and so we're coming up on 30. So thank you very much. So Simon, for appearing and giving us the lowdown. I don't know when's the last time you slept. I imagine you may have taken a couple of naps here and there, but this obviously has a huge effect on your schedule.
Absolutely, and I think as kind of the last thing for me, I've had a bunch of people kind of just asking, what are we doing here at lynda.com about this? And I want to make sure that for those people who are tuned in, we are entirely behind this. We understand this is, as Tim Cook said, it's the biggest change for iOS developers since the introduction of the App Store. It really is a big change. We're all over that. To let anybody know, my schedule completely shifted. They're completely behind me. I am buried in Swift. I'm buried in iOS 8. We can't release any video content using Xcode 6 or using this new stuff until the NDA drops. We're simply not allowed to by Apple. But we are creating content, and we will have it out as soon as we possibly can.
That's great. Wait. That's fantastic.
I was super excited, but then when you said that it wasn't at all like JavaScript, now I am a little bit depressed. Hopefully because now I thought oh man, I can jump right into that, and now I'm like, oh man, it's not going to be as easy. But I imagine you're going to make it very interesting to look at. So what are your last words here, James?
It was fairly uneventful from a hardware standpoint, but I think it's a lot more eventful than people realize because of the way that the platforms are sort of blending together. iOS 8 is going to be, they're starting to open things up a little bit more, and I'm really happy about that. The Touch ID is now open to non-native apps, which is interesting. I think we're going to see a lot of people writing things that are going to integrate into Apple hardware that couldn't do so before, and of course they're trying to, the home market which is a huge market, home security, turning on your lights, things like that. To be able to just do that instinctively from your computer and not have to go out and buy a ton of other equipment and other platforms is going to be pretty interesting. So,
yeah. So my last word has to be that I really believe that Apple is like the toasters on Battlestar Galactica, the bad guys. They have a plan, and they don't do something until all their ducks are in a row. So the Cylons are very smart about this, and so is Apple. I think that we're seeing what Apple is going to be doing in this release. We're seeing sort of the seeds of what Apple is going to be doing something, whether or not they release a watch or other devices they're building, like the engine behind it. And we're going to see some big things, and they've promised us big things. They just haven't delivered yet. But we're going to be seeing that happen. But we need this all to be baked into the operating system. That connectivity, the health kit, and the home control, all that stuff is Apple preparing itself to go big. So we're going to see lots.
I would also like to point out that while Apple is focused on integrating platforms and building wearable tech and things like that, that Google is investing its money into artificial intelligence and killer robot drones. So right. who will eventually win the platform wars may be decided by superior firepower. Just think about that for a while.
We will all go into hiding, and we'll all have Apple phones. The only way we'll be able to communicate. So that's time for authored content. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll be back shortly with more shows. Just keep it here. Let's go to authoredcontent.com.
Hey, which episode is this, Ray? Which episode? Since you're in charge of the numbering.
Is episode 70, the big 7-0.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Very cool.
Thank you guys for joining me, and happy 70th anniversary also of D-Day. So our show number coincides with the 70th anniversary of D-Day, so that's awesome. Hello to all you veterans. All right, so we'll talk to you guys again soon. I'm going to hit.
Thanks.